Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to our webinar. Folks are still joining, so we're just going to give them just a couple of seconds to join us. May I wish you a very warm welcome to you, our attendees today, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. As you can see on the screen now, our topic for today is aligning contracts and organizational goals, why enterprises can't afford to get this wrong. For those that don't know me or can't recognize my voice, my name is Paul Branch. I am the Chief Operating Officer and Chief Technology Officer here at World Commerce and Contracting, and it's my pleasure to be your moderator for our panel discussion today. So if we could please begin presenting the slides. Excellent, thank you so much. Before we get started though, we've got a lot of ground to cover today, guys. So before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping things. So you may have noticed that you've joined the session today with your line muted. Absolutely, that's not because we don't want to hear from you, we most definitely do, but we also want to maintain the audio quality of the recording, because that recording will be emailed, a link to the recording will be emailed, and the slides will be shared afterwards. To enable you to ask us questions though, which we are really keen to get, please use the chat webinar feature in the panel, and if your setup is anything like mine, it's in the black bar down the bottom. So please do feel free, as questions come to you, please do feel free to ask our panel. We have an array of organizers in this session. Delighted to be joined in this session by Boskalis, a global dredging and marine expert. The little introduction, I think, for World Commerce and Contracting, where we're helping our members around the world achieve high-performing and trusted trading relationships. CATS CM is a contract management methodology that's been deployed since 2005. CATS stands for Contract Administration and Tracking Scenarios. And last but not least, our partner here today, SirionLabs, a leading enterprise contract lifecycle management software provider. Before we get into the detail though, let me just share a little bit about Boskalis. Boskalis is a leading global dredging and marine expert, and is a great use case for how to derive material benefit from the application of contract lifecycle management, but most importantly by blending these the contracts with the defined organizational goals of the corporation. So it's a fantastic use case of how to blend these things together. So we'll get to that in just a second. So over the next 60 minutes or so, we're going to try and cover three things for you. First off, aligning contract management to organizational goals. Why bother and how do you do it? Then we'll look at how this alignment has enabled better value creation. And that's where our colleagues from Boskalis are going to share with you the real benefits that they've seen from adopting this method. And then finally, last but not least, we're going to hear about how you can lever CLM technology to drive this contract and organizational goal alignment. So with that stall set out, let me introduce you now to our panelists today. So first off, from Boskalis, we have Eric van Loonhout, and Eric is a contract manager at Boskalis within the IT department. He's responsible for managing IT contracts and has played an important role in the implementation of contract management at Boskalis. Eric is certified for CATS CM at both the foundation and the practitioner level. So next up we have Arjan van Berkem. Now Arjan has a great job title, don't you think? Chief Strategy Wizard at CATS CM. He's a global knowledge leader in business ecosystems and the application and use of artificial intelligence. He believes contract management is a vital business function in a society where doing and going alone is a no-win strategy. Next to his wizard role at CAT CM, he shares his advancing insights as a lecturer at different universities around the world. And last but no means least, we have Claude Murray. Claude is the co-founder and president at SirionLabs. He's been a leader in the global sourcing domain for over 2 decades, and prior to founding SirionLabs, Claude pioneered ISG TPI's supplier governance solution. And earlier in his career, Claude held multiple leadership roles in the procurement and IT organizations at GM and the Coca-Cola Company. He's a fellow and honorary vice chairman of World Commerce and Contracting. So we're looking today at this alignment between contracts and organizational goals. First off, we're going to look at the why and the how. So Arjun, why don't you tell us why is it important to have alignment between organizational goals and contract objectives?
Yeah, thank you very much. We're living in uncertain times. And it's not just COVID or the pandemic just currently raising. Things are changing fast, and it means that the demands of an organization are also changing fast. And if there is no alignment between the goal of an organization and the contract, you will have the risk that you have contracted something that will not be needed. And especially if you look at the aggregated level of all the things you have contracted, you know that that's what you need to achieve. So every organization out there buys something, adds value, and then sells it on. That means that 2 out of 3 are governed with contracts. And if you want to achieve your objectives in an age where everybody is in a hyper-specialized supply chain, we need to be very aware that if you want to capture value, it's not just about managing a contract, it's about managing the portfolio of contracts and then aligning it to the strategy on where you want to go and where you want to be. Because if you don't align, you'll stand and take the risk of having a commitment that you cannot manage or not realize, and that's vitally important in this age. So in end, hyper-specialization makes it important. You need to leverage the power of all these aggregated commitments, and most of all, you need to be ready for change. And this is why you need to align it. Paul.
Makes good sense, I think. So this alignment between the business objectives, organizational goals, and the contract is critical. A lot of our research at World Commerce and Contracting has shown that there are, when you have organizational goals around delivering value, managing compliance, and coping with uncertainty, we've developed this VCU, Value Compliance Uncertainty Framework, that shows that different commercial models are appropriate to different levels within that VCU framework. So for example, if you have a lot of uncertainty in delivery or in deliverable, or worst case, both of those dimensions, then a value-focused adaptive sort of commercial engagement that you would see in an agile contract would make a lot of sense. Whereas where you have less uncertainty in delivery and deliverable, a more contract-focused approach is appropriate. So compliance style and value drive the appropriate commercial model, and indeed the level of automation that makes sense to be deployed. But let's not forget, human innovation is also key to the successful implementation. Now, Arjun, back to you. What are the consequences to organizations if this sort of alignment is missing?
Well, it starts with something really simple, that you actually procure or sell something that's not aligned to your strategy and to your execution. So you might end up with having bought stuff you don't need, or having committed to sell something you cannot make. And we see that, especially if you look at the spend area, you also see that you tend to spend a lot of money on the things that are actually not important. So if you really understand what your organizational goals are, you can then also prioritize in where you want to spend your dollars, because you don't want to spend it at something that's not value add. Next to that, is we see is there's a lot of room for improvement between that what is procured and that what the business actually needs. So by making that part of the contract, you force the business to much better explain what they want to achieve and therefore what's need to be procured, whilst you also give procurement all the ammunition to actually procure that what needs to be done. So we see in aligning these goals that the real consequences are there is that you are starting to take significant risks in your business continuity. And especially in today's age where organizations for over 50% are dependable on what they achieve on contracts, well, I don't want to put my business at risk if it's 50% of everything that I do that's not aligned with the strategy I'm following. And that is why we see that it's so important to align this to actually capture additional value and don't just focus on your cash out.
I mean, it's common sense, really. I think much as indeed is much of what we do. But let's focus on this value creation component. Turning to you, Eric, why was realizing this alignment important for Boskalis?
Yeah, Boskalis is a large company with a lot of IT contracts to manage. Due to SaaS solution and outsourcing, the number of contracts is strongly increasing. Within the IT department, we were looking for a method to get more out of our contracts and be more in control. I often use the quote, if you're not in control of your contracts, you are not in control of your business. Realizing the strategic goals into contract objectives helps us to create better contracts. First of all contracts became more flexible. For example, up and down scaling of services is an important goal for Boskalis as a project organization. This company goal is now described and adopted in our contracts. Also, the alignment helps us to change the behavior of our suppliers. They do not act only like traditional suppliers, but also start thinking about the added value for Boskalis based on our organizational goals. In the contract, we write down steering measurements to reward suppliers who manage to achieve our strategic goals. How can the supplier contribute to Boskalis' success? And strategic vision is an important question we ask our vendors before we start a new contract. Finally, the realization of the alignment is important for Boskalis management and the Boskalis contract owners to better understand the content of our contracts. They can see the strategic objective of Boskalis in the content of the contract. The result is even more support from the organization to manage our contract. Okay, thank you, Paul.
So by getting this strategic framework clear and a direct line of sight down into the contractual framework enables this strategic alignment to be pushed throughout the organization to ensure optimization of goals. Makes good sense. So we've heard some theory, and we've also heard from a practitioner. But back to you, Arjan, how can organizations actually achieve this alignment?
Yes, thank you very much. The important part of any strategic goal, any organizational goal, is first to have a mission and a vision. And it sounds like really something obvious, but if you already take a contract and don't put in the consideration something on your mission and your vision on your organizational goals, you're not going to get there. So first, a mission and a vision, and that's bounded by laws and regulations, of course. Then you make sure that you translate them into organizational goals, which need to be extremely measurable and as tangible as possible. And they could be a lot of things. They could be CSR, they could be cash, they could be compliance. There are a lot of different goals we see at our clients. So then you translate them into contract objectives. And the contract objectives you then measure against the contract performance. It's a cascading model that goes down and doesn't work the other way around. So we always say Start by having a mission and a vision. Then make sure that you translate your mission and your vision into very clear set organizational goals. These then you translate into contract objectives. And then you could translate those at the actual deliverable level, what you want to achieve and want to have delivered or sold. Because this methodology works on both sides of the aisle. It's not just about buying, it's also about selling. But running it as a structured way, very top down, aligning it on all levels is the only way organizations can achieve this alignment. Because if you do it the other way around, you will find that the aggregated contract performance does not add up until the organizational goals, because everybody has sourced something on their own. So this is about breaking silos, it's about breaking islands and finding value. And that means that you need to manage this from the top. That's what this is all about.
And makes good sense. And the point that you make here is that it must be driven from mission and vision down through contract objectives into performance.
Correct.
Very good. Okay, so Arjun, back to you. I think on our next slide, you share with us some more of this methodology and how you would go about achieving this. So back to you.
Yeah. Let's first start with the picture you see on your top left-hand side. We see that there are 4 key pillars to the CAT-CM methodology that drive the overall structure. First is that we see there's a significant distinction to the work to be done and all other contract matter. Let me explain that, because that's quite vital. The all other contract matter is everything that has to do with the housekeeping of the contract. It has to do with the management, with the governance, etc. The work to be done are the services actually delivered. And we see that there is a clear distinction between the governance and anything that has to do with managing the contract and the actual performance of the stuff delivered under the contract. That leads to a certain set of roles. Roles is for us not the same as functions. Roles is something you can do in the entire process of managing a contract. So that can be a service manager, a realization manager, a project manager, a contract manager. Everybody has a certain role. A very important role in this is that you also assign the process owner contract management and a contract owner role. So that means that these roles are from top to down in the organization on all levels embedded. The third pillar we take is that we see that there are 10 essential elements in every contract. We get into this presentation later, but these 10 elements are the 10 aggregated levels that you need to manage a contract. Now, the good part is that there can be 10, but the reason, of course, we're talking about scenarios is that you should make it scalable, because a small contract that's not important should maybe get some different attention than a big contract that's very important or mission critical. And the next step is a structural approach to every contract. So we say that every contract has 6 stages, which is what we like to call an onboarding phase, or creating the contract phase, then a classical PDCA cycle, which you continue to run, and then you end up at the end with a closeout session, because even after the contract is terminated, there are usually obligations that still need to be managed. Now, how does this work in an organization? Is that you see that every organization has classical 3 typical layers. The first one we see is what we call the enterprise level or the ecosystem level. That is where you drive the aggregated wisdom over your entire portfolio of contracts, commitments, etc. you have. This is where you link your top level goals with your top level contract objectives. This is something that's done on the executive level, where you actually decide what value you want to drive from the fact that you're no longer alone. Now, the level below that is usually run in every organization in silos. There's vendor management, there's procurement, there is HR, there is finance. All these silos have their own individual needs on information that they need to create to bring knowledge into their silos. And on the lowest level is where the operational execution is, where the day-to-day delivery is. Now, how does this add up? At the lowest level, you aggregate the data on what is actually happening. Then on the tactical level, you create knowledge based on the specific elements or silos within the organization where you would like to capture this knowledge, where you want to bring the next step. And on the highest level, you then aggregate all the knowledge into wisdom, where you actually decide on where you want to have your ecosystem going. This helps you get value at all levels. And if you want to move into the area of really managing your entire ecosystem of contracts, you need a system, you need a methodology that actually helps you capture value at all these three levels. And especially if you want to capture the top end value, as I said earlier, you need all the operational information. So whilst the implementation goes from top to down, the implementation, so actually the getting the value, goes from the bottom up. And this is why it's very strongly recommended that you choose on where you want to focus on and where you want to capture. And this is why it's so important that a company like Boskalis actively engages with their supplier base, with their contracts, to actually drive this value. And to see how this adds value on all the levels, maybe Claude, you can add some ideas and vision on this.
Yes, thanks, Arjen. I think this is really, for me, a critical new development in the technology space, and particularly the CLM space, where traditionally CLM was focused on the operational level. It assisted organizations with execution. With BI that came on board, artificial intelligence, auto extraction, it started moving up to the tactical level, where you started to turn the data into knowledge that are combined out of the different functions and presenting it in a way that better decision making could be done. But what was always missing was that CLM systems, and when I talk about CLM, I mean it in the broader sense, from creating contracts all the way to governing the contracts after they are signed. That connect with the enterprise level, strategic level, has always been missing. Now, with bringing this type of capability, methodology into the technology, we are linking what traditionally was operational and tactical with the enterprise level strategic vision, and where the organization is setting its goals and objectives. So for me, a very significant shift that has now taken place for those technologies that embrace this type of methodology, and certainly has a way of connecting the C-suite now with the contract management, a gap that I think we all struggled with in the past, but now those two are connected, and it makes a significant difference in how you are perceived in the organization and how you add value to the organization. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to Paul.
Thank you, Claude. A question, if I may, though, just before we move on. Certainly, what you've shared is very consistent with the research that we've seen at World Commerce and Contracting. An area, though, particularly it became apparent before, but absolutely laser focus as a consequence of the pandemic, the importance of the supply ecosystem. Does this methodology, you think, extend beyond the enterprise and into the ecosystem?
That's a great question. Absolutely, it should. The idea that one looks only at your own processes, even your own technology, without reaching further, either to your buy side or your supply side, or your sales side, to your customers and to your suppliers, and integrate that information, start operating with the same information, is absolutely critical in today's environment. You can no longer operate in those silos or islands of information. You have to be much better integrated and at a much higher rate of speed. So this all enhances the whole thinking around how do I look at my whole ecosystem rather than just my own organization.
And leave us back into the technology, because certainly when I was deploying CLM capability, integration into back office systems, even within the enterprise, was prohibitively expensive often, and into the ecosystem was a pipe dream. But now with the application of open APIs, the ability to share data much more readily between applications is a reality. Is that consistent with what you've been finding?
Absolutely. It's almost today, if you don't work on an API basis with your technology, if you can't easily and quickly interface to either systems within the organization or to your partners in either on the supply side or the sales side, you're not going to make it as a technology. It's almost become stakes with which you enter the game. If you don't have it, you're not going to survive. You have to be able to talk to other technologies quickly and effectively, and it needs to be done in a very cost-effective manner.
Totally agree.
How we think about getting access to the internet. Most people on this call probably don't remember how long it took you to get onto the web 20 years ago. Today, it's immediately there. It's the same.
Unfortunately, I do. But so Eric, you've heard a great method here. So share with us, how has Boskalis' journey been for you, from the adoption of process to the key challenges that you've faced?
Yeah. Well, we started with the creation of the role of contract manager and contract owner within the Boskalis organization. The contract manager is responsible for executing all the agreements in the contract, and the contract owner is the person empowered to make decision about the contract. We divided the contracts on the base of fields of expertise. For example, all IT workplace contracts were appointed to one contract manager, and all IT engineering contracts were appointed to another contract manager. We invested a lot of time in a good contract tooling to create one overview containing all contract data. For example, the final termination date, contract value, the delivery of important reports, and other important contract dates. Also, we created work instructions for our contract managers for several contract management processes, like the invoicing process, the contract signing procedure, or performing a risk analysis. We then sent all our contract managers to training. Every contract manager did the CAD-CM exam. This common use of CAD-CM resulted in many benefits. We now speak the same language and work according to one method and have one way of working. The management also had a CAD-CM workshop, so they also understood why we work in a certain way and understand that managing contracts is important. A contract is not just a piece of paper. You have to work proactive on a contract to make it a success. Using the CAD-CM methods is really helping our contract managers to perform their daily task. Besides cost, also employee satisfaction is important, and providing our contract management with a good toolkit like CAD-CM really helps them to become more satisfied. CAD-CM provides very practical tooling to manage contracts. For example, how to create a contract file, how to perform a contract assessment, information about meeting structures, and also a toolkit of managing contract risk. Finally, my advice to organizations who want to professionalize contract management is to be pragmatic. Of course, we created a roadmap first, but make sure it does not lead to any bureaucratic process. So thank you, Paul.
So the framework was a traditional one, really around process, identifying a process that really worked well, raising the skills and capabilities on people by effective training, and then by deploying a system to ride alongside those two other legs to keep the thing running. If you were to do this again, what would you absolutely categorically not repeat?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, we write down a lot of work instructions for our contract managers, how to comply to all the different aspects of the methodology. I think the method is quite pragmatic. So in the end, of course, it's always good to document the way you work, but I don't think it is always necessary. So if you want to get started with it, then it's not always needed to write down everything in a and be very specific on the way you want to manage a contract.
So great. Thank you for sharing that. Back to you though, Eric. So you've been through this journey, and our members are going to be really interested to hear what benefits you saw. So what were the results?
Yeah, well, now for each vendor we have the same let's say contract management governance, the same meeting structure, one way of working. This makes us predictable as a client towards our suppliers. We do not only sign contracts, we also read them and manage them. An important CAD/CM instrument called the contract assessment is used to be sure Boskalis receives the services as described in the contract, and we remove the services which are not needed anymore. By removing unnecessary services from our contracts, we have seen several cost reductions. Contract management by CAD/CM helped us to improve our communication, not only to our vendors, but also to our own contract owners and stakeholders. Each contract mutation is discussed with the contract owner, and we are in close contact with the key users to make sure the contract fits their needs. Because we are in control of our contracts, also other departments now ask us for advice. By using the contract as a basis of our work instead of vague agreements that are not on paper, we reduce the number of escalation and also the number of notices of default we send to our suppliers. And by doing risk assessments for each contract, we try to prevent escalation to happen because they are already described and taken care of in the contract. By using a proven method like CAD/CM, our contract managers have a good toolkit to manage more contracts. This way fewer employees are needed to manage our suppliers in the end. Finally, we have even more insight in our contract portfolio. Shadow IT will always be there, but because our contract management organization now work very effectively, more and more contracts are moving towards us. So thank you, Paul.
I'm guessing also that whilst you saw a reduction in the cost to operate, that didn't necessarily translate into contract and commercial management professionals sitting on the beach. Instead, those guys could then be redeployed to drive a higher order value and higher value work. So you basically got more bang for your buck.
Correct. We've seen every contract manager who did the CAD/CM exam was able to manage more contracts. So in the end, it took us less effort to manage all our supplier and our contracts because they are using a proven way of working. They had a good toolkit. They had all the best practices out there. So that's why they were able to manage their contracts much more efficient. So we did not fire any people, but in the end, it's we can have a lot bigger workload because we use this method.
Sure.
Yeah.
So the business benefits to Boskalis are clear. So Claude, share with us, why was it important for SirionLabs to embrace this methodology?
Paul, a couple of reasons. For us, for the first time using CAD/CM, it connects the traditional contract management, supplier governance to the C-suite. It was always difficult to explain why we did what we did. Intuitively, they knew it was a lot of work, but it really didn't sink in. And while a good contract manager or a contract executive would always think about the objectives of the company, there was never a focused process and a structured process that helped ask those questions when a contract is written or when a contract is managed. Am I doing this in a way that furthers the objectives of the company? So for me, this is the missing link that we now have connected within the CLM. And it certainly makes the discussions at the C-suite level much, much easier to have. Typically also we find contract drafting, and I think all of us who's been there has done this for a long time. You get a contract, you look at best practices, you drive it really hard to get it done on time, you try to dot all the I's and cross all the T's, but you really don't always think about the company's objectives. And then, of course, the supplier deliverables that come, and you look at that and you look at all the SLAs and have they met the obligations, but you don't really think about which ones are critical to further the objectives of the company. So those are the ones that now get more attention. It's the ones that drive the focus. And that for us is really, really critical. And there's really been a gap in the market of CLM tools that took this approach that went all the way in that triangular slide that Arjen showed earlier, from operational to tactical to strategic. So for us, this really completes CLM in a very significant way that we did not have before.
And provides that visibility, the point that you make right at the very beginning, provides that visibility into the C-suite so that they can gain confidence in that the operational data that's being summarized is actually convergent to a particular organizational goal that they've put in place.
Exactly. You have to translate what you do into their language in a way that makes sense for them. This methodology helps you to do that. It shows them that you are actually working at their level, thinking at their level, and that's so important.
So very clear. That's the why. But how did you go about it? How has it been implemented in Sirion?
Good. So on the next slide, you will see that there's many aspects to the methodology, and we basically took the methodology, looked at how the alignment with the organizational objectives and goals take place, embedded that in the technology. We took the pillars that Arjen talked about, the 4 pillars. We embedded that in the technology. The different scenarios that needs to be decided on, which is really the intensity by which you govern different contracts. Those are today captured into the system, and the workflows associated with that are then created so that a certain type of contract that has a certain scenario is then managed in a certain way. Along with that, of course, all of these 10 pillars that you see in front of you have been embedded within the technology. It is all there today. It forms the complete execution and feedback loop. And I think that feedback loop is really important, because the alignment of the obligations and the service levels and the results from that, i.e. how the suppliers are performing, and feeding that back into what was my contract objectives and what was my organizational objectives, all of that now flows flawlessly within the technology and can so much more easily be managed, but also is so much more visible in terms of where the gaps are not, and how are we doing well or not well in terms of the contract objectives, and then of course the organizational objectives.
Very clear. So in this model though of implementation, how do you link the contract objectives that you see here back to those organizational goals?
So what we do is you actually start the other way around. You document within the technology, what are my company objectives? And once that is done, as you bring up a contract in the system, you are required to fill out the contract objectives, but it gives you, and I will show that on a slide a little bit later, it actually will show you, this is the company objectives, pick which ones this contract is going to support. So it forces you to think about that. And then once you have the objectives, you go to the next level with all of the execution elements. But then again, when you look at obligations, you look at service levels, the system will force you to think through this obligation, what contract objective is it supporting, which organizational goal is it supporting. So it sort of gives you that visibility as to some obligations are more important than others. And it sort of begs the question then, why am I doing these obligations? Why am I doing these service levels or KPIs? I may not need them, or I may need to spend less time on them. So the system, by virtue of the fact that these are all embedded in the technology and takes you through that CATS methodology as you go along, sort of forces you to ask those questions to yourself. And it sort of refocuses the effort in terms of what is important and what is not important.
Very good. Makes great sense. So to our listeners today, please do keep the questions coming. Use that Q&A and chat feature to ask us questions. We've got a whole barrel load, and we'll have time to get to them in just a few minutes. But Claude, back to you. So clearly a solid implementation in Sirion. But what are the benefits of using CLM technology to deploy this CAT-CM methodology?
Right. Yeah, it's a great question, because we obviously want to do things faster, better, with more information all the time. And what this allows us to do is an effective way to execute the disciplines that CAT-CM brings in the organization and help ensure that it is followed on a regular basis. It's that seamless integration with leading contract and supply management automation and CATS that makes the way in which we approach the work different, and it allows that work to be done in a very well thought out and meaningful manner that again aligns with where the company wants to go. And of course, it drives further efficiencies in all aspects of contract and supplier management, including efficiencies for your suppliers, and or if you're working on the other side, for your clients in terms of visibility, but also in terms of having more of a single version of the truth as you look at all of these aspects. And then of course, the power of AI that is really starting to come into its own now is assisting CAT-CM not only in getting the work done, but also in terms of the insights that then comes out and gets fed back all the way up to the C-suite. And then, of course, leading edge analytics of today in the technologies help you with those insights, help you to take what is in the methodology and enhance the visibility so that it can bring to the forefront very quickly and very efficiently where things are working well, where things are not working well. So these are all the parts, and I can probably on the next couple of slides just give you a few examples of what I'm talking about directly out of the technology. So here, for example, as I had mentioned before, as I do the objectives of my contract, you can see in the red box that is there, these are the business objectives or the organizational objectives that is being defined, and I literally go out and say, for this objective for my contract, which of the objectives am I supporting in doing so? And if I'm not, I need to really ask the question, why am I not doing that? So you can see the link that exists today from the methodology now embedded in the technology. And then on the next slide, for example, you can see that as you look at the obligations and report the obligations in your contract, and these are typically extracted automatically by the system, it then will ask you, well, which contract objectives are you supporting? And in turn, which organizational objectives are being supported by these obligations within the system? We have a habit of putting a great number of obligations and a great number of service levels on the suppliers, which is done at a cost, and they put that in their pricing. And so often those things are interesting, nice to have, things we think, well, I'm going to nail the supplier with that. But in the real world, it's really not that important. And it's just an incredible amount of energy that is wasted, both on the supplier side and on the client side. So this kind of forces that decision making again, all embedded within the system. Of course, then the system keeps track of all of this. On the next slide, for example, here are service levels or KPIs, and we do the same thing with that. Which contract objectives does this service level or KPI support? Which business objective does the support? So it gives you all of that information within the technology and then tracks it for you and will tell you where things are either in line or not in line. And then on the next and final slide, one of the interesting things we have not talked about today that I find really, really helpful in the CATS methodology, because it really takes us one step further that we typically do not go. And that is, it asks you, in this contract, is this some elements of this contract, either obligations or service levels, is this impacting another contract? And if so, what is it that is impacting another contract? And then also you get to the reverse, what contract is impacted by it? So as an example, if it is critical in my business as an airport to have a contract with service levels with the airlines in terms of online departures, right? That's how I make money. That is part of what is my business objectives. I need to get the planes to depart on time. Now, if I've outsourced, let's say, food supply, or I have outsourced security, those contracts also have turnaround times that needs to be reported. They have KPIs or service levels. And I need to understand that if this service level in this contract is not met, it is impacting another, maybe more important contract for me. The system now tracks all of that. Again, the methodology forces you to think through this, forces you to record that, and now the system takes over and it tracks it for you, and it will tell you and remind you where the link between one contract and the other contract is. Something that really helps you keep the focus on what is important and what is not important in terms of your execution of contracts.
Powerful stuff. Thank you, Claude. Closing remarks then. In terms of, I think the questions for you, Arjan, what are your views on this? How can organizations harvest the power of the sum of their contracts?
Yes, thank you very much, Paul. I think that Claude and Eric have already shown quite some cool examples on how this is going to work. But the harvesting power of the contract is that you actually set standards, that you are able to expect and explain to your partners what you want to achieve from a value. It also means that you can aggregate information, and that's what I meant when I earlier talked about bringing stuff from data to knowledge to wisdom, is that you actually can follow what is really happening. And when you do that, you can then start driving real value, and you can actually start steering on elements. Claude was talking about the airline industry, and I always say when I talk about the airline industry, if you are in the business and you want to have a high net promoter score, then it's vital to make sure that you understand which supplier or which organization adds at what moment in time the most benefit and effect to your net promoter score. You only know that when you aggregate, because everybody is in complex value chains, in complex supply chains, and you're not going to find it if you don't aggregate. Then the total supplier value, if you understand your supplier, If you understand what you're doing on that aggregated level, you can then talk about other topics like innovation on a totally different way, because you understand what's happening where in the value chain. And last but not least, there is an aggregated supply chain risk as well. If you look at, for instance, at the market for production of aspirin, there are only 2 companies in the world that make the base raw material for that. And by understanding what the relations of your partners are at both ends of your value chain, then you also understand why and where the aggregated supply chain risk is. Because what you don't want is to have a significant lock-in somewhere that you don't know, and therefore you don't manage, and you get confronted, and you might have significant business disruption. So for me, it's about, and as it's stated here below that as well, it is impossible for any organization to do it on your own, which means that you always need to be in a relation. An important part of any business relation is that you write down what you want to achieve together. We call that a contract. And if you want to manage your ecosystem, then you need to understand all your contracts. And if you do that, there's a significant power that can be managed in the sum of all contracts. And that power is that you actually will start driving from a cost perspective to a value perspective, and also from a revenue perspective, again, to a value perspective. That is what we are bringing to organization. That's why harvesting the power of contracts is so important.
Totally agree. And the points you made here were valid pre-pandemic, but particularly at the pandemic, that aggregate supply chain risk absolutely spotlight on that particular issue as a consequence of misunderstanding or underestimating the extent of your secondary and tertiary supply chain and ecosystem. Guys,
if I might add to that, it even goes one step further. You actually are able to decide which companies and which partners you need to support, because they are because they are extremely important for your long-term business continuation. If you don't know that, you can be confronted with the fact that 1 or 2 of your suppliers that deliver a small yet important mission critical service, you get in all kinds of problems.
For sure. Okay, we have literally stacks of questions, so please do keep them coming though, but we're going to go into our Q&A slot now. What a really interesting set of slides. Great job, guys. But loads of questions actually all over the place, but Eric, you're gonna kick off first. Question: to what extent have suppliers embraced and seen value in this approach? This goes back to the discussion that we had around the supply ecosystem. What's the benefits to your suppliers?
Yeah, first of all, in the Netherlands, there are also suppliers who are using the CAD-CM method. So yeah, many of them seen the benefits. Yeah, and I think talking about Boskalis, using the method, we've seen more collaboration with the supplier. So instead, yeah, if we have a meeting with them, we always use the contract. We have a standard agenda with them. Yeah, and it makes us predictable. So, and yeah, also we make sure that in every contract, we also reward suppliers if they confirm to our governance based on CAD-CM. So yeah, that's also helped them to apply to our way of working now.
Really interesting, thank you. Another question for you that's just come in. How did the team at Boskalis gain buy-in from the business to invest in this contract management methodology and tool set?
Yeah, for the Boskalis business, it's everybody understands that it's very important to manage contracts. Before a contract is signed, most of the time it takes months, sometimes even a year. Yeah, and it's an absolute no-brainer within our organization that a contract is not only a piece of paper. You need to manage it. You need to be proactive in it. It's let's say a living document. There will be mutation. There will be conflicts. So you need to from the moment the contract is signed, the contract manager needs to do his job and start managing the contract. And yeah, within our organization, everybody understands that importance. So yeah, it was quite easy to also align the business in start using yeah, contract management.
Very, very interesting. It's sort of an allied question, but this one's to you, Claude. So this is around justifying making tools a priority when you know money's tight. So the question is, how can you overcome internal resistance that says things like, we already have a CLM tool that's good enough based on a module from a platform like SAP Ariba for spend management, or a Microsoft SharePoint contract repository for document management, bang a bit of workflow around it, and you've got a solution that's cheap as chips. Why is that not a credible argument?
Right. That's a question we get very often and see very often. And, you know, it is in the CLM space, it's not even comparing apples and oranges, as I often like to say. It's comparing apples and kumquats because it's so far apart. There's oftentimes not an understanding of what the functionality is that is really needed to actually manage your contracts, and where we have moved in the last 20 years from buying goods to now primarily buying services as organizations. I have to remember that the P2P systems were designed for goods, not for services. The traditional invoice validation, the three different documents that you compare, is simply not good enough for services. So it's a question of articulating that differences. Now, what you get in a good end-to-end CLM system today is that you can achieve about a 60 to 65% reduction in effort doing it, and you can doing it right with the right technology, and you can probably see that you're overpaying by as much as 5 to 10% of annual contract value. That in itself drives the efficiencies. However, for me, the more important thing to articulate, and I think Eric said that very well, if you're not in control of your contracts, you're not in control of your business.
Mm.
If you have that discussion with a senior executive today and say, how do you have even the slightest idea that what was contracted is supporting your business? That's a big red flag for them, right? A flag in terms of driving business outcomes, driving revenue, driving income, driving risk reduction, just generally having my hands around the organization, the bigger organization with all my ecosystem. I think that's the most persuasive argument today. We can use efficiency, we can use savings, but I think the argument is you're really not in control if you don't link everything. And you can't do that manually anymore. You have to link it with technology today to do it properly.
And there are regulatory requirements, Sarbanes-Oxley, for example, that requires you to do these sorts of things. So,
all of those.
Exactly. Okay, so we've probably got time for maybe two more questions if we can be as fleet of foot. So, Arjan, this one's for you. Which department within the organization should take responsibility for implementing CAT-CM?
And this is of course the $1 million question I get asked a lot.
Right.
At the end of the day, it's about assigning ownership. So it starts by assigning who is the owner of the process of contract management. We see that usually either resides in the CFO or the COO domain. And based on that, you actually see it's being down drilled to either a specific function within the business or a specific function within the finance organization. Usually in the finance organization, it's either part of risk or procurement. If you see it in the business, it's usually a support department specifically set up to run this. It depends quite a lot on the manner of how much impact external parties have on the result, on where it's placed. So you see that organizations that typically have a lot of external supply based on their total revenue have that more in the business, while you see that companies that are having that's mostly aligned to risk and continuity, that you see it's in the risk department. On any given day, I would usually start by implementing by using procurement, because that's where the regular stuff is. but in the end of the day, after the implementation, it usually ends up somewhere in the business.
Gotcha. Okay. Unfortunately, guys, we have many more questions out there that we haven't had time to get to. We will provide responses to those offline. Thank you so much for what was a fantastic set of slides, a really interesting discussion too. There's an opportunity for you to complete a survey to our listeners here, and please keep a lookout for that recording and for the follow-up email that will show you the slides and how to listen to the replay. And please do keep connected. Please do. These World Commerce and Contracting events are a routine part of our membership engagement. So please do continue to join us. Just remains for me to say a huge thank you to Eric, to Arjan, and to Claude for a fantastic presentation, and to you, our audience, for staying with us and for asking the great questions that you did throughout. Please do enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you again. Bye-bye.